Colonialism is, I don't know, I think because it's not slavery, it gets like looked over in a way. It's almost like colonialism is almost like COVID slavery. It's like it's like slavery from home. It's like remote slavery. We don't gotta go there. We could just log in and reap the benefits without having to go there and do the work. It's crazy. I apologize. I can't say these names that well, but Gamma Watt, very popular international business research person, 2001, Franklin and Rose, 2000. A colonial relationship between home and host country will increase the likelihood of trade by 900%. Think about that. That means that if I am Haiti and you are France, there's a 900% likelihood I'm going to do trade with France if I'm Haiti. When we look at trade and we look at wealth and accumulation of wealth at a global scale, when there's a 900% likelihood that you're going to do trade with the colonizer of your country, a lot of your wealth is being redistributed to your oppressor, and that goes across the table. This is not like a link just for a certain like this is across the board. It increases the likelihood of trade 900%. I think that's so impactful because we are in a global world, global markets. The world moves together now. Like, it's shrunken significantly over time. We're so much more connected, but colonialism was not that long ago. And it has a huge impact on why globalization has taken place the way it's taken place, because it sort of started with colonialism. You know, like, this is crazy. When I saw that in the research, that link had such an impact on trade, I immediately started thinking, man, how could it impact human rights and how these companies respond to human rights violations? So that's how this whole thing sort of came to be. And that's why I had to go down that wormhole studying colonialism. And so colonialism, let's talk about it. Colonial relationship is a dynamic in which one state has direct control over another state using multiple mechanisms. That's a definition from Ratner, 2001. So when we talk about this relationship of colonizer and colony, this is what we're talking about when one state has direct control over another using multiple mechanisms. Okay. The colonizer would also typically adopt sovereignty over the colony. That is from Angie, 1999. I apologize if I say that wrong. Sovereignty over the colony essentially means the colonizer is going to dictate the rules and regulations of the colony. The colony won't have its own say in how it's ran and the culture that exists. They have to follow the rules of the colonizer. Angie argues, this is from that same 1999 article, that major European countries colonized essentially all states in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific by 1914. I want to pause there because let's put this in context. Let's put it in context. Slavery in the US, you're talking 1860s, it was abolished, right? And so what this is saying is, okay, if we're looking at 1860s, slavery was abolished. Between 1860s, 1870s, when slavery is ending, and the early 1900s, that 30, 40-year period, colonialism is spreading. And by 1914, according to this article, all states in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific were colonized by major European countries. So from 1914 and on, like, you're talking decades of control. It's not, and it is by force. Let's be clear. Colonialism is, I don't know, I think because it's not slavery, it gets like looked over in a way. It's almost like colonialism is almost like COVID slavery. It's like it's like slavery from home. It's like remote slavery. We don't gotta go there. We could just log in and reap the benefits without having to go there and do the work. It's crazy. So colonialism, man, it really had a huge impact on the world, and especially these black and brown places, Africa, Asia, and Pacific. Colonial relationships are one of the most critical aspects to examine in understanding the disparities of economic success. That's Ingerman and Sokoloff, 2002. I think that's pretty clear because we just sort of went over this. By 1914, everything had been taken. World War II takes place in the 40s. A United Nations is created, and yet at that time, 1/3 of the world was still being colonized. According to, I cannot say this name, but European colonialism reversed the levels of development in many countries outside of Europe. That is from 2 different articles. Also, Keith and Agundale, 2007, examined the influence of British and French colonial ties on human rights behavior in former colonies located in Africa. They found evidence to suggest that former British colonies have worse human rights records than former French colonies. I started thinking about, are Brits more cruel than the French? I don't know, but chattel slavery, I think, was uniquely cruel, and that existed in these original colonies. That's where it was bread and butter. That's where it was made. So maybe there is something to that. I don't know. This research was so eye-opening and impactful, and I started to ask myself, why don't we emphasize this more in the schools when we teach about history? And the impact of how history shapes modern society. Colonialism has such an impact on where we are today. And the research suggests that it's had an impact on so many different ways that we live our lives. As we continue, I don't have much more to add here because I don't want to make this say unnecessarily long. Pause. But colonialism, we speak about the impact. One of the other things about it is that it was so gradual, whether it be the onset or the conclusion. So again, it's just because you might have independence in a certain year, it doesn't necessarily mean that the colonizer didn't have power over you once you were independent. And I think most colonies, if you just look at these colonies, you would see that very clearly. Even if they're quote unquote independent, there's something there that exists. There's a debt that's either paid to their colonizer or something. You're not just scot-free independent of your colonizer, even when you're independent. Another crazy thing about colonialism is that some of these countries, man, they had more than one colonizer at a time, like in a certain territory. Might be multiple imperial countries who claim a piece of a land. I had no clue about any of this stuff. And when I started thinking about the more micro societies and the stuff that's been driving us most recently, a lot of race and power and equality, and when in reality, human rights weren't even created for us. Just think about that. Human rights weren't even created with us in mind. And when I say us, you could do the math on who us is. You could do the math. It's in the research. Us is not everybody. When I say they, the people in power, the entities in power, there's a certain club that gets to play in the sandbox. And so when we talk about freedom and future, I think it's important to understand these entities that are in power, they are there for a reason. And they're not just going to willingly give that power away to anyone. They're not going to do that. And when we as individuals walk around talking about equality and rights and who are these things really written for? That's the first question. Why do you feel so entitled to something that's not for you? I think we need to find a different approach, ultimately, for a lot of the reasons that I'm pointing out. This is why I say, well, what is equality? What was ever equal? When? When did equality ever exist here? At what point? Before here was even a thought. You look at European history, it ain't equal. It ain't equality. I can tell you that much. You can watch Game of Thrones, see that it ain't equality there either. What is equality? And why does it mean so much to you? I think that we often get caught up in the wrong, spending our time and energy in the wrong concepts when we need to be more realistic and strategic with the approach if we're really trying to get different outcomes.